The cameras were rolling, the world was watching, and Russia wasn't ready for what came next. At the United Nations summit in New York, Turkey's defense minister didn't mince a single word. He stared directly across the chamber and declared, "Crimea is not yours, and it never will be." The line hit harder than artillery. For Moscow, it was public humiliation. For Kyiv, a signal that a new heavyweight had stepped back into the ring. What looked like diplomacy was actually a gauntlet being thrown at Putin's feet, because Turkey is done walking the line between friend and foe. A power shift is beginning, and it's unfolding in the most volatile waters on Earth, the Black Sea. For more than a decade, Ankara balanced on a razor's edge. Friend to Moscow, ally to NATO, supplier to Ukraine. It bought gas from Russia, sold drones to Kyiv, and negotiated ceasefires while profiting from both sides. But every balancing act ends with a stumble. In 2025, Ukrainian precision strikes reached deep into Crimea. Russia's Black Sea fleet, once untouchable, began to burn. Satellite photos showed plumes of smoke curling from Sevastopol's docks. Putin's generals, embarrassed, muttered that foreign help must be guiding Ukrainian missiles. Everyone knew what they meant. Then came the insult that shattered the illusion of partnership. A Russian patrol ship intercepted a Turkish-flagged cargo vessel near the Kerch Strait, accused the crew of smuggling arms, and detained them for questioning. The sailors returned home shaken and humiliated. Inside Ankara's presidential compound, that incident landed like an explosion. For years, Erdogan had tolerated Moscow's arrogance in exchange for trade deals and energy discounts. But now Russia was treating Turkey like a subordinate power. So, at the United Nations, Turkey struck back with words sharper than any missile. Yashar Guler's statement was no diplomatic slip. It was strategy, a message to the Kremlin. Turkey remembers who it is. And in one public moment, Ankara flipped the regional chessboard. To understand why Turkey's defiance cut so deep, you must trace the bloodlines of history, back to when empires fought for the same sea. For 250 years, the Ottoman Empire and Imperial Russia were locked in a cycle of invasion and revenge. From the Balkans to the Caucasus, their armies clashed 12 times between 1568 and 1918. Every battle centered on the same question: who controls the Black Sea? In 1783, Catherine the Great seized Crimea, tearing it from the Ottoman-backed Crimean Khanate. For Istanbul, it was an amputation. For Moscow, a birthright. That loss still echoes in Turkish memory as the moment Russia first touched warm water and never let go. Decades later, the Crimean War erupted. Britain, France, and the Ottomans joined forces to stop Russia's advance. The Battle of Sevastopol turned the peninsula into a graveyard of empires. When the smoke cleared, 500,000 men were dead, and the map of Europe had changed forever. But even in defeat, Russia kept its eyes on the Black Sea. The Ottomans fell, but their successor, the Republic of Turkey, inherited a singular obsession: never again let a northern power dominate that sea. That instinct still shapes Ankara's every move. Then there's the human side, the Crimean Tatars. They're a Turkic Muslim people, culturally and linguistically bound to Turkey. When Stalin accused them of treason in 1944, he deported nearly 200,000 to Central Asia in cattle cars. Thousands died from cold and starvation. To modern Turks, their suffering isn't distant history, it's family tragedy. So when Russia annexed Crimea again in 2014, arresting Tatar activists and shuttering their schools, Turkey saw ghosts returning. Erdogan vowed that Ankara would never recognize the annexation, not only because it violated international law, but because it reopened an old wound carved into the Turkish psyche. Every Turkish president since Ataturk has treated the Black Sea as sacred ground. Every Russian ruler since Peter the Great has treated it as destiny. That's why this confrontation was never about a single speech. It was the next chapter in a 300-year rivalry that refuses to die. After New York, the rhetoric became reality. The Black Sea turned from trade route to pressure cooker. Under the Montreux Convention of 1936, Turkey controls the Bosporus and Dardanelles, the straits linking the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. No warship enters or leaves without Ankara's permission. That makes Turkey not just a coastal state, but the gatekeeper of an entire ocean. During Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Ankara used that authority to block foreign fleets from entering, preventing an even larger war. It also brokered the grain export corridor that fed millions. For a time, Turkey looked like the calm center of chaos. But calm doesn't last long in geopolitics. Russia's economic promises began to crumble. Gazprom's proposed gas hub in Turkey stalled, then died. Russian tourists, once a lifeline for Turkey's economy, stopped coming. And as Russian naval patrols grew more aggressive, Ankara saw the writing on the wall. Moscow no longer viewed it as a partner, but as a pawn. Turkey responded the only way it knows how, by expanding its reach. Its defense industry surged. Baykar's TB2 and Akıncı drones proved decisive in Ukraine and in conflicts from Libya to the Caucasus. Contracts worth billions poured in. Ankara invested heavily in homegrown missiles, submarines, and radar systems, determined never to rely on anyone again. Then came the quiet cooperation, the part no one admitted publicly. Turkish surveillance data began finding its way to Ukrainian strike planners. When precision rockets obliterated Russian fuel depots in Sevastopol, analysts noticed the trajectories aligned with flight paths of Turkish-made drones. Ankara didn't claim credit. It didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself. By mid-2025, the balance of power in the Black Sea had shifted. Russia's fleet, once dominant, was hiding behind Crimean ports. Ukraine, backed by Western weapons and Turkish intelligence, was taking the fight closer to the peninsula than ever before. Turkey had quietly redrawn the rules. It didn't fire the first shot, but it opened the gates for others to do so. That is the hallmark of Ankara's strategy. Confront without declaring war, influence without occupation, control without invasion. Meanwhile, Erdogan used the tension to rally his nation. Turkey stands where justice stands, he declared in Ankara, framing the crisis as both moral and strategic. Polls showed his approval rating jump nearly 10 points. To his citizens, he wasn't just the president. He was the man who dared to look Putin in the eye. And to the West, Turkey had become indispensable again. NATO could not move a ship, a plane, or a convoy through the region without Turkish cooperation. Erdogan knew it, and he used that leverage masterfully, negotiating new trade deals with Europe while keeping Russian gas flowing just enough to prevent an energy shock at home. Every move calculated, every statement deliberate. That is how Ankara turned a 6-word declaration into a geopolitical earthquake. Now, the question that defines this era: what happens next? For Russia, Turkey's transformation is catastrophic. It loses its last friendly voice within NATO. It faces a southern neighbor that can throttle its naval access at will. And it must watch as its influence in the Caucasus and Central Asia erodes under Turkish-backed initiatives. Economically, Moscow is cornered. Ankara has reduced dependency on Russian energy by a third, increased imports from Azerbaijan and Qatar, and built new pipelines that bypass Russian routes entirely. Even Russian banks in Istanbul, once crucial lifelines against sanctions, are now under tighter scrutiny. Militarily, the picture is no better. Drone warfare has tilted the balance. Since 2022, at least 20 Russian warships have been damaged or destroyed by Ukrainian forces using technology partly developed or supported by Turkey. For a nation that once prided itself on naval superiority, that's humiliation on an epic scale. For Ukraine, this shift is a blessing. Turkey's open defiance gives Kyiv a powerful ally whose actions speak louder than resolutions. Every new Bayraktar rolling off the assembly line near Kyiv's outskirts is a reminder that one NATO country still believes Ukraine can win. And for the wider world, this marks the birth of a new power reality. The Black Sea is no longer a Russian lake. It's a shared battlefield of trade, surveillance, and influence. Every cargo ship, every energy pipeline, every grain convoy now moves under the watchful eyes of Turkish radar. But Ankara's rise comes with risk. Russia will retaliate. Not necessarily with tanks or missiles, but with the weapons it knows best: cyber warfare, disinformation, and energy manipulation. It might stir trouble in Syria, where both nations operate. It might arm Kurdish militias. It might even push refugees toward Turkey's borders to sow chaos. Erdogan knows these possibilities, and he's preparing accordingly, strengthening ties with Azerbaijan, expanding drone bases in Libya, and deepening cooperation with Gulf states. In essence, Turkey is building its own network, a web of alliances stretching from the Mediterranean to the Caspian. It's no longer content to be NATO's outpost or Russia's client. It wants to be the third pole, the independent power that others must negotiate with, and that's the deeper meaning of this moment. Turkey's stance on Crimea isn't just about territory, it's about identity, a declaration that after centuries of serving as the crossroads of empires, it is finally acting like one itself. For Moscow, that's an existential threat. For Washington and Brussels, it's a reminder that influence doesn't come cheap. And for the rest of the world, it's proof that a nation once written off as a regional actor now sits at the center of global decision-making. The message from Ankara is unmistakable. Turkey will not be sidelined, silenced, or underestimated. It will talk to Russia when it must, trade with Europe when it can, and fight for its interest when it's cornered. That's why Yashar Guler's 6 words hit harder than any missile. They weren't just about Crimea, they were about centuries of history and the rebirth of Turkish power. Because power in the modern world isn't just about armies or fleets. It's about leverage. Overseas, over trade routes, over the perception of strength itself. And right now, that leverage belongs to Turkey. The power shift has already begun. The only question left is who dares to challenge it. The message is clear now. The world has entered a new phase. The old balance that once kept Russia dominant and Turkey cautious no longer exists. In its place stands a different order. One where words can shake empires and where even a single sentence spoken in New York can redraw the map of power across the Black Sea. Turkey's defiance has done more than challenge Moscow's might. It has reignited a rivalry buried beneath centuries of dust. And as the world watches, both nations are maneuvering not just for territory, but for legacy. Because whoever commands the Black Sea doesn't just control trade routes or ports, they command history itself. What comes next will decide far more than who controls Crimea. It will decide whether the 21st century belongs to a fading empire or to a nation that has learned to play the game better than anyone else. And as the echoes of that UN declaration fade, one truth still reverberates through the corridors of power. Turkey is coming for Russia. And this time, it isn't bluffing. If you found this analysis powerful, don't forget to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dive stories on modern warfare. Your support keeps us going, and every click helps us uncover the truth behind the battles shaping our world.